Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Adlam with Youth Pledge for Employers. I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Elizabeth Ling from Elizabeth Ling Mediation. Elizabeth is a mediator, and thank you, Elizabeth, for being with us this afternoon.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I guess I've got to start as the first question. Please tell us about Elizabeth Ling Mediation.
So Elizabeth Ling Mediation is my own very, very small business, and I run every aspect of that business. So the only person that you deal with when you come to Elizabeth Ling Mediation is Elizabeth Ling. So that means that I have to wear lots and lots of hats within my business, that I have to do the marketing, I do the invoicing, I do the actual mediation, I do any promotions, I do all of the networking, all of the growth. So that means that no 2 days are ever really the same. And I know everybody says that about work, but I think for most people it is quite true, to be honest. And it's definitely the case for me, because even when I'm not generating actual income from mediation, then I am promoting my business and trying to find some new clients.
That's brilliant, and I love the instant breakdown, as you said, of all the different hats you have to wear and all the different roles you have to fulfill. For anyone watching this video who is baffled by the idea of a career in mediation or is wondering what that involves, if you had to break that down to them, how would you break it down?
So a mediator is a person who is appointed by either an individual, a company, or an organization where there is conflict, where there is an issue that is causing a barrier to people being able to either move on or to resolve an issue. So I am accredited. You have to be accredited to be a mediator, and I am accredited to carry out civil, so neighbour disputes and commercial, neighbour disputes and things that are civil matters. Also commercial mediation, so contractual conflicts and issues over invoicing and payments. And I'm also an accredited workplace mediator, which is the favourite of my mediation hats, which is where I am licensed to go into work organisations and work premises and resolve conflict between members of staff or staff and management. Can be all sorts of things, but that really is what mediation is in a nutshell. I wouldn't say that mediation is something that I woke up in the morning when I left school and thought to myself, I know I'm going to be a mediator, because actually it's taken me a long, long time to build up and fall into the shoes and to grow into the shoes of a mediator, because it is something that requires quite niche skills. But if you have those skills, then you can become a really, really good mediator.
That's brilliant, and you've touched on skills there, which leads me lovely and nicely onto my next question, which I say you've got sort of, I say I know you've got to wear many hats on, but you've got the the challenge of running your own organization, and let's say the challenge of being a mediator, all of which I'm assuming cover need a variety of skills. Sort of, I know it's difficult to distinguish them, but if you had to discuss some of the skills you think you need in mediation, and then some of the skills you think you need in running your own business, what core skills would you say are involved for both?
Mhm. So the core skills for mediation is the ability to remain confidential and the ability to be discreet, because mediation is successful only where people can share really and truly what they think about a set of circumstances. And so the most important role of the mediator is to be able to keep a secret, because you may find yourself in a situation where you're going from one employee to another, one to another, in doing what we call shuttle mediation. And the only way that that is successful in resolving that conflict is where both have your trust not to tell the other what the other has said. So that's one of your really, really absolute number one safety skills, is the ability to be confidential. The other thing that you really absolutely have to do as a mediator is listen, and listen to what it is that is not being said, because usually we would allocate 2 to 3 hours per per party to kick a mediation off. For the first hour, everybody's very polite to one another, and we talk a lot on sort of a surface level. And then usually by the end of the second hour, we are getting round to what the actual problem is. And in the third hour, we address the problem. And that takes patience, and it takes an awful lot of listening and a lot of open questioning. So when you are a mediator, you only ask open questions, which is who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so the way that you ask the questions of the participant means that you draw them out of themselves and that they begin to tell you what the issues are, and then you can really get to what's actually causing the conflict, as opposed to maybe even what they think is causing the conflict, or what they would like you to think is causing the conflict. In terms of running my own business, I was employed for many years. I worked actually worked in local government housing, which was where I learned about conflict,
Okay.
both in the office and out in neighbourhoods, because I was a estate management officer, which means that I've always worked on large estates where councils own properties, and dealt with neighbour disputes, community disputes, tenancy issues, tenancy disputes, people who haven't paid, drug issues, antisocial behaviour, all sorts of things. And that was really, as I say, where I learned about conflict. Which is why I say that you wouldn't wake up in the morning when you leave school and think, I know I'm going to be a mediator, because it's something that you have to find your feet for. So yeah, I was employed for many years, which meant that I had a very regular income. And that money would be paid into my bank account every single month on the 25th without fail. And whether I was unwell, or whether I had a crisis, or whether or not my car broke down, or my children were ill, I received that money, because that was my entitlement. Now, when you work for yourself and you run your own business, that paycheck's not coming. That's not coming, and that is a very different experience if you are used to receiving money regularly, and then you set up a business and it is up to you to generate that business, and then collect the income, and then allocate the income so that you don't spend it all at once, because of course that's very important when you're self-employed, is that you don't think, great, I've just had a 2-day mediation, and now I'm £1,500 better off, so I've got £1,500 to spend. No, you haven't. No, you definitely haven't. So it's all of those, being your own bank manager, being your own graphic designer, sorting all of your own things out, having to learn new apps such as Canva. I have to put lots of bits and pieces together on Canva for social media. I had no idea how to do that. I'd never even heard of it. And then a friend of mine said, hey, you need to use Canva, I'll show you how. And I'm still learning. And I'm still learning a lot of things every single day, in all aspects of my life, really, not just in my business and mediation, in all aspects of what I do. And I would say that being self-employed and having my own business is easily the most challenging thing that I've ever done. I don't find the mediation difficult. It's almost like a natural gift to me. It is. I don't find that stressful, despite the fact that it can be very pressurized. Doing the mediation is the easy part. The difficult part is retaining your clients, getting new clients, and managing the finances and making sure that your money comes in, because we all need money.
Yes, we do. Tell me about it. I think that's a really interesting breakdown of what you've given there, and I love how you sort of touched on your own experiences and how they've influenced, as I say, the different directions you've gone in. I'll ask you a little bit more about sort of your career journey and stuff in a moment. And I know it's difficult to say, because, as we said, you've got sort of two sides of this. You've got your mediation, you've got the running the business yourself. But dare I say, if you had to try and talk me through a typical day, what would that look like? And what are the challenges you face in a typical day, and what are the rewards as well?
Well, being a mediator is just unbelievably rewarding, because people who mediate are generally really relieved at the end of the mediation. They tend to be very nervous at the start and very apprehensive, not very trusting, quite cynical generally, thinking, as if this is going to make any difference. This woman comes along, talks mumbo jumbo about how do I feel about this and what impact is it having on me and blah, blah, blah. And then once we go through the process and people have gone, blah, and people do, it all comes out, which is why we allocate plenty of time for it. Then people go away from the mediation, particularly if we're able to resolve all or part of the problem. Ooh, like that, phew, that feels so much better. And that is just unbelievably rewarding and really special to me to be able to have that positive impact on people. For a typical day, well, my day always starts with a dog walk. That's non-negotiable. It usually also starts with getting my children to school. That's also non-negotiable
So
because
no room for mediation there, is there?
there is no room for mediation there. You're going to school. And and actually that's a really key part of it, because if I mediate from home, it's so confidential that it's very important that I'm here on my own. Because even if people hear only one side of the conversation, that is outside of the mediator's agreement. What I say and what I do in a mediation is completely confidential. So a typical day would start probably around 9 o'clock. And if I have a mediation, then that usually involves going on site to see people. I always see people individually first, and as I say, I allocate about 2 to 3 hours for that. And then usually the next day, after having seen the participants individually, we'd usually try to get either the group or the participants pair, 3 people, 4 people. We usually would try to get them together if it's safe to do so. It isn't always safe to put people in the same room as one another, and that is why you mediate very, very carefully ahead of doing that, because in some situations things can be quite explosive and stressful and people can become very upset. So all of the time you're needing to use your judgment to think, is this going to work, is that going to work, and making those changes as you go along. So that would usually fill my day. I don't mediate every day because number one, it's exhausting. It's very, very tiring. Number two, I'm a tiny business, so I can't really mediate all day every day because otherwise I don't get all of the other stuff done. So on an admin day, then I would typically be posting on LinkedIn, which looks effortless. I don't know that I make it look effortless, but other people do. It looks effortless, but it's extremely time consuming. Thinking of the content, getting the content right, making sure that it's good quality, that you're not in a situation where you are compromising your brand, because personal branding is become very, very important in owning a business. I'm not saying that that's great, but it is a fact. And so all of the time you are making sure in business that you're projecting your best self to the person who might be your next client, because you want to make sure that people know that what they're going to receive from you is a really good quality product. So a typical day may involve a mediation. It may involve an awful lot of sitting at a desk doing an awful lot of admin, which is not my favourite, because I am not really a desk-bound sort of person. It's not something that I particularly enjoy. However, if I want people to pay me and I want somebody to employ me next month, then that's what I have to do. So I balance the keeping still and being quiet, doing my admin, with being out and about mediating, which is what I really love. It's what I absolutely love to do.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think that's a really good sort of coverage, as to say, of a typical day, and I love the the honest feedback about sort of the good parts, the challenges, and as I say, the sort of especially the challenges around, as you say, being a sort of a small business. And when I've been having these talks with employers, I've come across people who, as I say, have sort of struck out and, as I say, started their own business and decided to, as you touched on earlier with Canva, they sort of suddenly have to build websites, learn social media, learn marketing, do all these things. So for someone, if there's someone watching this and they have an interest about maybe running their own business someday, and they are literally looking at things thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start, I don't know half of these things that are required. What would your advice be, and how did you overcome those challenges, as I say, about maybe tackling tasks you didn't even know where to start to do?
Yeah. So my advice would be to start small and to persevere, because there have been many, many times on this self-employed journey for me where I have had weeks at a time with nobody contacting Elizabeth Ling Mediation, nobody particularly responding to what I'm putting out there. And you do think to yourself quite a lot in business, why? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? And then you get a win, and that win takes you on to the next win and the next one and the next one. And if you start small, um, what I did to begin with when I was doing this is I was working as well. And in fact, I still do quite a lot of work that isn't just mediation, but I was actually keeping hold of my substantive post in housing. And what I did was I imagined my business as pieces on a chessboard. And what I did was every day for 1 to 2 hours, I would sacrifice the 1 to 2 hours in which I would normally watch TV or read or wind down. I sacrificed those and put into the business. And then over the first 6 months, those 2 hours, 3 hours over the weekend, I'd try and put a couple, like 2 or 3 hours in every day. That really began to snowball, and those little pieces of effort that I made became a big effort. And that was how things started to evolve, and how it started to grow. Sometimes it felt really overwhelming, and I thought to myself, I'm just, what? Why am I doing this? But then that's the time really to probably for that day close the computer and think, "Do you know what, I'll come back to you tomorrow." And that's what I've always done. It's those little incremental wins, those little investments of time. Canva is a really great example of that. I could see that people were putting on Instagram and on LinkedIn these lovely pages that were, pink and yellow and had got these pictures on them, and they moved. And how are people doing that? These are companies that I know, do their own marketing. How are they doing this? So my friend and colleague Claire Lucas from Claire Lucas Real Business Solutions. She's also available on your system, I believe. She said to me, "You need to use Canva," and I run training on Canva, which you can do virtually. And here you go. Here's the fee. I'll send you the full set of training tools. And actually what I did over a series of a few Saturday evenings was still sat down in the living room with my family and spent family time, but I watched those tutorials on my laptop on my lap, and I taught myself to use Canva. And in fact, what I didn't expect is that I actually taught my 13-year-old daughter to use Canva as well, because she was looking over my shoulder and saying, "Mum, mum, mum, let me have a go at that," because everything was pink and yellow and moved. And of course, she's much better at it than I am. Of course she is. So it's a case of perseverance. You have to persevere. I'm a naturally quite, in terms of achieving things, I'm naturally very impatient. So that has been a real learning curve for me. And at times I have tried to do far too much, taken far too much on. Um, and that's been a real lesson to me as well. Just do one thing, and if you do that one thing really well and then that's done, then move on to the next thing, and slowly it begins to grow. And as I said earlier, it's taken me a really long time to get where I am. I left school when I was 16, and I became an apprentice. I became a local government apprentice, and I'm now 42, and did until really recently still have those local government ties. And I didn't just wake up one morning and think, "Oh, I'll tell you what, I'm going to be a mediator and I'm going to be really good at it." It takes time. And one of the things that I would say to any young person in these times is not what do you want to do, but where are you going to start? Because this is my second career in my life, and who knows, maybe I'll have a third.
you've almost actually beaten me to what my question was going to be, which there's no worries there. And I love the fact that, as you say there, persevering, starting with little stepping stones, and letting things snowball. I think that really takes away the sort of big pressure and fear that, as you say, you can have when starting your own business. As you say, if you just focus on it as little goal, little goal, little goal,
Yeah.
and watch it snowball, it's a really nice way of doing it. My final question, really, and I say you've sort of touched a bit on it there, but we've asked all our employers this, is that if you could go back and sort of speak to 17, 18-year-old Elizabeth, sort of maybe starting out, as say, on your sort of career journey, what piece of advice would you give to yourself?
Gosh, there's a lot of things I would say to myself. There's lots and lots of things, but I think one of the most important things that I would tell myself, and that I've actually only learned quite recently as a 40 something, is to not be so hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself up. When you are very negative towards yourself and very negative about yourself, what I've learned is that your brain doesn't realize that it's you, and it thinks that it's an external person who's saying, "Do you know what? You've made a rubbish job of that. You're never going to manage this. You don't know how to use Canva. Nobody's going to want you to mediate." All of those things. And when I was younger, it wasn't those things, but it was also still lots of negative chatter that went on in my head, despite being a very, very self-confident person. Um, I do, like everybody else, have that negative chatter that says, why are you bothering to do that for? There's going to be somebody who's better at that than you. There's going to be somebody who's cleverer. There's going to be somebody who's, earning more money than you. Of course there is. But it took me a long, long time to understand how damaging that negative chatter is, and that in fact there are some really easy, and I mean easy, skills that you can learn to just shut that negativity up and to turn that into a much more positive dialogue, which is so much more healthy for you. So I think that's probably would be my main message to anybody, and is certainly my message to my own children, is just be positive. You don't have to be fantastic at everything the first time you try it. You're on at the start of a very, very long journey. If you're lucky, if you're really lucky, you will live a very, very long time, and every day you will learn something new, and you will evolve into somebody who is fundamentally the same but actually completely different. And we're all on that journey, as they say. And I know that's a little bit of a cliche, but I also think it's quite true.
No, I completely agree with that. I think that's a lovely note to end on. So again, thank you for your time this
Oh, it's
afternoon,
my
Elizabeth.
pleasure, my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.